Hi.
Hello. We're in Matthew 26, starting at verse 57, asking the question when Christ is given his golden opportunity before the High Council of Judaism, the governing body of world Judaism in the first century, in Jerusalem itself, what's the designation he uses for God? So let's read from the New World Translation and see how they have rendered these 12 verses.
Those who took Jesus into custody led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and older men were gathered together. But Peter kept following him at a good distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And after going inside, he was sitting with the house attendants to see the outcome. Meantime, the chief priest and the entire Sanhedrin were looking for false witnesses against Jesus in order to put him to death. But they found none, although many false witnesses came forward. Later on, two came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to throw down the temple of God and build it up in 3 days." With that, the high priest stood up and said to him, "Have you no answer? What is it these are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. So the high priest said to him, "By the living God, I put you under oath to tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You yourself said it. Yet I say to you, men, from henceforth you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest ripped his outer garments, saying, "He has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? See, now you have heard the blasphemy. What is your opinion?" They returned to answer, "He is liable to death." Then they spit into his face and hit him with their fists. Others slapped him in the face, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?"
Are we surprised at the designations the authorities use for God?
Mm-hmm.
Or even the witnesses? In verse 61, you have 2 witnesses being cited as saying, Jesus said, "I am able to destroy the temple of God."
Mm-hmm.
So even if there was some sensitivity in Jewish circles to using the name God in public, out loud, the fact that it's in an accusation against Jesus, okay, that works well.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the high priest says to him in verse 63, "I adjure you," or
"By the living God, I put you under oath."
So the context here is the highest sensitivity in the Jewish religion was when you're put under oath, what name will you use? And if you use the sacred name, of course, it's the utmost risk to yourself if what you say is untrue, as we saw back in chapter 5 when he's talking about perjury and oaths.
Right.
But here, what does the high priest call God? Well, in the New World Translation, it has living God, and then Christ, Son of God. So the high priest is at least quoted in Matthew as using the designation God twice. They avoid the Tetragrammaton, of course. But the shock is when Jesus opens his mouth to respond. First of all, in the first part, how does it render it again in the New World Translation? 64?
64?
When he says, "Who are you? Are you
Answered like
the
the
Christ,
question.
the Son of God?" The answer is,
"You yourself said it."
or the ESV has, "You have said so," which is a designed ambiguity, but was generally an affirmation. In other words, yes,
Yeah.
but with reservations. The yes with reservations might be due to the fact that what the high priest and the Jews would understand by the expression Christ and Son of God would be different than what Jesus and especially the apostles would come to think of these designations as meaning later. So yes, there's a less than 100% affirmation, but when we get to Mark, we'll see there's a difference in what Christ's response is. But anticipating that, what's the part that gets him accused of blasphemy here? All he says is, I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of
Power. And coming on the clouds of heaven. Now you mentioned in the ESV and most other translations, the word power is capitalized.
In many modern translations, the word power is capitalized for the same reason the word heaven is sometimes capitalized, when it's a clear substitute for the name of God.
Mm.
So why does Christ say, sitting at the right hand of power,
rather than just say, I'm going to sit at the right hand of Jehovah?
Yeah. And I think what Daniel Patte has to say in his commentary on the Gospel according to Matthew is of great interest here. While Jesus does not need to say anything regarding his present status as the Christ, the Son of God, he speaks about the authority of the future. You will see. Son of Man. Well, the Son of Man is reference to Daniel, also to Psalm 110 maybe. The two Lords. Remember that dialogue between Christ and the authorities in Matthew as well. The Son of Man, in words combining those of Psalm 110:1 and Daniel 7:13, which he then goes back to the direct quote in Matthew 26:64, the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, but now with a capital P, as a substitute or a circumlocution for the name of God. And coming on the clouds of heaven, clear reference to the status of Messiah. By this statement claims even more power and authority than the power to destroy and rebuild a temple in 3 days. Although he speaks in the third person about the Son of Man, it is clear for the readers, and also for the high priest, that he speaks about himself. It is this claim of future power and authority which the high priest and the Sanhedrin view as a blasphemy. The text removes any possible ambiguity by presenting Jesus as speaking of sitting at the right hand of capital P power rather than of God. If the latter phrase had been used, one could say that Jesus was accused of blasphemy because he used the name of God improperly. His blasphemy is to claim that he will share in God's power. He's going to sit at the right hand of, well, we would render it if we'd been there, I suppose. He's going to sit at the right hand of Jehovah.
Yeah.
So his choice of this specific word, even in the New World Translation, but they don't capitalize it.
No,
so
they
you
don't.
think it's an abstract.
Yeah.
It's actually a circumlocution, a substitute for the name of God. Which reminds me, of course, of the videos we've already done on Daniel, where Daniel put in a similar predicament. His life is on the line, along with all the wise men of Babylon.
Before the most important audience.
Not just the throne of Judaism, as in Jesus' case, but the throne of the world, Nebuchadnezzar, in his court. Daniel, too, avoids the name, and far more clearly than here.
Yeah, he uses all kinds of different phrases that would indicate who he's talking about without actually saying.
Yeah. So we'll put a link to that, the Daniel video where we discuss this avoidance of the name, which is a religion with Daniel, it appears. He goes to extraordinary lengths to get around using the Tetragrammaton in public. And we'll also, in the next video, contrast Matthew's account with Mark's, and where Mark is showing, I think, even more clearly what was blasphemous about what Jesus has just said. Next time.